Hello, I'm Kimberlie Acosta. Welcome to the Native News Update on Friday, July 16th. Many of the stories you hear here can be found at our website, IndianCountryNews.com. And here's the news for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. BP finally stopped oil from spewing into the sea July 15th for the first time since an April 20th explosion on the BP-leased Deepwater Horizon oil rig killed 11 workers and unleashed the spill 5,000 feet beneath the water surface. BP said it capped off well appeared to be holding steady. Results monitored from control rooms on ships at sea and hundreds of miles away at the company's U.S. headquarters in Houston showed that the oil is staying inside the cap. President Barack Obama said the progress was good news but cautioned an anxious public not to get too far ahead of ourselves. Obama said the cap was still being tested and there was still an enormous cleanup job yet to do. There was no end in sight to the cleaning of the oil already in the water and on the shore. Somewhere between 94 million and 184 million gallons spilled into the Gulf, according to the government estimates. President Barack Obama has declared Hill County and the Rocky Boys Indian Reservation in north-central Montana a disaster after severe storms and flooding swept through the area in June. The declaration means federal money will be available to state and eligible local governments and certain private nonprofit groups for emergency work and repair. Hundreds of people on the reservation were without safe drinking water more than 2 weeks after flooding broke the reservation's water lines, tore up roads, and forced dozens of evacuations. Navajo President Shirley Jr.'s request for a third consecutive term has ended when the tribe's highest court ruled that he was rightfully disqualified from the race. Election officials cited a tribal law stating that Navajo presidents are limited to 2 back-to-back terms in the office and removing him from the race. Shirley twice appealed, but the rulings weren't in his favor. I respect the decision of our Supreme Court justices, Shirley said. They have the final say, they decided, and now I know that this is the end of it. Members of Northwest Indian tribes want a larger voice in how school educates Native American kids. At a meeting at Chief Leshy Schools in Puyallup, Washington on July 15th, tribal representatives and Indian educators gathered to tell officials from the U.S. Department of Education that tribes want to exercise more local control. Some want to extend to students both in schools run by tribes and in local public schools, which educate the majority of Indian students. Federal officials were in Puyallup to take part in one of 7 meetings scheduled with tribes around the country. The purpose is to gather tribal feedback as Congress prepares to debate reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The remains of a 19th century Aboriginal warrior Yagan has been laid to rest in Western Australia nearly 180 years after he was killed and his head severed was displayed in a British museum. The private ceremony held last weekend by the Noongar tribe coincided with the opening of Yagan Memorial Park in Swan Valley, just outside of Perth. Yagan was shot by a European settler in 1833. His body was believed to be buried in Swan Valley, but his head was taken to England, where it sat in a museum for a century before being buried in an English cemetery. After years of petitions by the Aboriginal community, Yagan's head was exhumed and returned to Australia in 1997. A federal appeals court ruled that a Texas school district cannot punish an American Indian kindergartner for wearing his hair in traditional braids to express his family's religious beliefs. The ruling from the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans upholds a Houston lower court ruling. The 5-year-old boy's parents, Kenny Arocha and Michelle Bettenbaugh, argued their son's identity in court papers as, argued their son, identified in court papers as AA, has a constitutional right to wear his hairstyle that conforms to his Native American religious beliefs. And that's the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. I'd like to thank you for joining me and have a grand day.